Hi everyone, this is Axel from dreamsanctuary.net. If you've been following up to here, first, congratulations on handling this material, and second, you've probably noticed I haven't spent much time on the last step of my dream guide. This last step, step number 6, is about responding to a dream with a symbolic act. This comes from Robert Johnson's inner work. In that book, he has a chapter on rituals with some very memorable examples. If you haven't read that book yet, I highly recommend that chapter as a companion to this video. So instead of repeating what's in that book, I will take a different approach this time, and I will discuss and illustrate the principles of symbolic action using Jodorowsky Psychomagic, which is a very unusual healing method that works with symbolism. For that purpose, I'll refer to an old dream fragment of mine and how I responded to it. This is what I remembered when I woke up. A shadowy masculine figure appeared in the corner of a room I was in. His appearance is frightening. He looks at me with a smile that implied that there was nothing I could do to prevent him to come closer. And the picture on the left is the best representation I could find of this shadowy figure. And on the right, there is this smile that implies something treacherous, maybe a form of superior knowledge or the unavoidable nature of the thing that is to come. In this case, the interpretation is not too difficult. It's something like the apparition of a somewhat repressed masculine aspect into consciousness, and that's the shadowy masculine figure, and it cannot be prevented by the ego, and that's provided by the symbol of the smile. There's no immediate context for that dream at that time, but there was a broader context. This was a time where I struggled a lot with my masculinity, what it meant to be a man, and especially in its sexual dimension. At the time I was inexperienced, and so the sexual world was something that I both desired and shied away from. And any young man should be able to relate to the mix of insecurity, lust, anxiety to perform, romantic feelings that accompany this unknown world. In any case, as a shadow work advocate, meaning that I believe the shadow should be embraced and not repressed, I decided to respond to this dream with a symbolic act to promote acceptance and integration. So, what did I do and how did I do it? As I woke up that morning, I wrote down my dream and started thinking about it during my morning routine. I had a free day that day, so I decided to walk to the shop, and during my walk I kept thinking about the dream. What was cycling through my mind is this: how do I welcome this dark and masculine aspect of my psyche? And the word dark and masculine seem to be the two key aspects of the dream I should take into account to formulate a response. As I entered the shop, I walked around and my eyes laid on some ready-made food. I saw some hot dog and it came to me that this might be what I was looking for, because the hot dog is a very phallic symbol. And so I grabbed one of them and I kept walking around the shop to try to find more phallic symbol. One of the things I decided to settle on was a large soda can, something that looked like a phallus as well. And satisfied, I bought those two products and brought them back home. It's important to note that at this point I had no idea what I was doing, but I was content with the momentum I was gathering. Once home, I went into my room and decided, with those two words in mind, dark and masculine, to look for things that would aesthetically or symbolically respond to these two key terms. And this is what I got. I grabbed 2 vinyls and a book. I picked them on intuition just because they responded to this aesthetic sensibility of dark and masculine. It doesn't really matter what they are, but I might as well go through them. On the left, you have a vinyl from the band The Angelic Process, Coma Wearing. That's some very dark music. In the middle, you have an album by K.O. Dot named Stained Glass. That's some very contemplative and instrumental music. And on the right, you have a book named Monsters from the Id, and that's a Freudian analysis of horror movies. Once again, I should repeat that I didn't do this with intellect or premeditation. I picked them because I like them. Once I had all these items, I made kind of an altar, and still in this somewhat altered state of consciousness, this trance state, I grabbed the hot dog and I took the sausage off the bun, I put the can into the bun, and I started shaking it suggestively as this was part of my genitals, if it was an extension of my genitals. And I shook them for a little bit, and at some point I opened the can, spreading the carbonated bubble as this was an exaggerated sexual climax. So that's what I did. That was my symbolic response to the dream, showing that I was not going to suppress this aspect of my personality. Rather, I was committed to build an intimate bridge towards it, fertilizing it if you want. Another way to think about it is because this dark and masculine aspect was coming towards me, I decided to respond in the most dark and masculine way that I could think of. And because my insecurity at the time was mostly of a sexual nature, I added a sexual element to the symbolic act. Immediately after, I had a very painful headache that lasted 3 days. It's hard to explain what this headache was like, but it sat on top of my head and it felt like my entire right brain side was being reorganized from within. It didn't feel like a normal headache. And when the headache came off 3 days later, I felt more embodied, and for the first time I felt good about my masculinity. I was fully conscious that I had the ability to give pleasure, but also that I could hurt people. And so this empowerment came with the responsibility that I should act righteously. So what happened here? I'm probably never going to be able to convince anybody accusing me of such, but this was not occultism or magic with a K. And the main reason is that there was no power motive involved. There was no intention to achieve anything for myself. I was trying to respond to the dream, to acknowledge that I got the message and that I was ready for it. But instead of using words or working to achieve a change of attitude, I tried to use the same language than how the dream came to me, which is symbolism. So what I was really trying to achieve is a psychomagic act. And the rest of the video will be dedicated to discuss psychomagic using Jodorowsky's books and movies as a reference. So what is psychomagic? Psychomagic is not talk, it's an act with a poetic dimension. Jodorowsky writes, psychoanalysis is a technique that heals through words. The psychoanalyst, who helps the patient progress by converting the messages sent by the unconscious into a reasoned discourse, believes that once the patient discovers the cause of his or her symptoms, the patient can eliminate them. But it does not end like this. When an unconscious urge emerges, we can only be released by fulfilling the urge. Psychomagic proposes that we act, not just talk. The consultant, following a path contrary to that of psychotherapy, instead of teaching the unconscious to speak a rational language, learns the language of the unconscious, which is composed not only of words, but also actions, images, sounds, smells, tastes, or tactile sensations. And so here you have an example of a psychomagic act where this man is being painted gold, and this is a very strong symbolic declaration of something like embodied solar consciousness, of a masculine ego that shines like the sun or is like gold. Now, something that is really important to understand is that in psychomagic, the inner world and the outer world are not the same. The book continues. For example, if someone wants to eliminate his little sister and pins a photograph of the little one onto a melon and busts the fruits apart with a hammer, his unconscious assumes the crime is done. This way, the consultant feels liberated. It is understood in psychomagic that those who populate the internal world, the memory, are not those who populate the exterior world. Psychomagic works with the memory. Given the previously cited case, it is not about eliminating the flesh and blood little sister, who is now an adult, but about eliciting a change in memory. Here's an example of the movie Psychomagic to drive this point home. There is this man who has a lot of unexpressed rage towards his family, which is his dad, his mother, and his sister. He felt that he was not being heard or listened to, and he wants to move past this. And he undergoes a psychomagic act which is to bring 3 pumpkins in an alleyway. And then he put a picture of his dad on the first pumpkin, a picture of his mom on the second pumpkin, and a picture of his sister on the third pumpkin. After that, he grabs a red hammer and let loose, destroying all the pumpkins until he feels satisfied. The book comments, "To change the world, it is necessary to begin by changing ourselves. Images retained in the memory are accompanied by perceptions of ourselves at the moment when we had the experiences. When we remember our parents, just as they acted during our childhoods, we do so from an infantile point of view. We live accompanied or dominated by a group of egos at different ages, all of them manifestations of the past. The goal of Psychomagic is to convert the consultant into his or her own healer, and to assure that the consultant is placed within his or her adult ego, the ego that cannot occupy any other place but the present." Let's come back to the previous example. Once the man has exploded the pumpkin, he picks some select pieces, package them tightly into a box, write the address of his mother, father and sister who lives in Australia on top, and send the package through post. Now at the end of the act, he feels release. Why? Because one of his younger egos has found a way to express something that was bothersome. And so now he's free to be less of his past self and more of his current self. So that's Psychomagic in a nutshell. As a method, we really need 3 things to make a successful psychomagic act. It requires a true confession, a poetic healing act, and a leap of faith. We'll talk about those 3 for the rest of the video. First, a diagnosis must be made, and in psychological language, a diagnosis is really a confession. Jodorowsky says, "First of all, I would thoroughly study the person, compel him to tell me absolutely everything. Instead of trying to divine, I subjected him to a very simple interrogation. I would question my clients about birth, parents, grandparents, brothers, sisters, sexual life, relationship with money, emotional life, intellectual life, health. I quickly became a record holder of dreadful secrets. Thefts, rapes, incest, sadomasochism, homosexual fixation, masturbation, everything has happened. A familiarization with a person's psycho-emotional state appears to me to be a prerequisite for the prescription of a psychomagic act." See, the problem here is that people usually make only partial confessions. They guard the best, if I dare say, for later. And the idea here is that the whole truth is usually unspeakable. It's too dreadful to share to anybody. It really takes courage and guts to reach the bottom of any given personal issue. So Jodorowsky has mainly 2 tools to try to get to that full confession. One of them is the tarot, and the second one is to track the family tree by a method called Metagenealogy. I cannot do justice to those 2 methods, so I would refer you to his 2 books. If you are interested in tarology, go to The Way of Tarot, and if you are interested in how trauma can spread generation through generation, then Metagenealogy is the book you want. The main thing here is that we need a confession, and in my case I use the dream to get to that point. Because the dream is a product of the unconscious, there's usually no distortion by the defenses of the ego. And in that one instance, the interpretation was straightforward enough that I felt confident I was not going to add bias into it. Now that we have our confession, we're looking towards responding to it with a poetic act. And there's 4 guidelines to it. The first one is metaphorically fulfill the predictions. Predictions here is meant in the sense of whatever keeps your ego stuck in the past. It could be threats that you've internalized, events that had a traumatic quality to them. It could be inherited problems through the family line, etc. And the best way to be free of these predictions is to fulfill them in a metaphorical way. That is to say, instead of rejecting the threat, surrender to it. And the second step is do something you've never done. The I who endured the illness is younger than I am. It is a mental construction imprisoned in the past. Upon freeing ourselves from the vicious cycles of our habits, we discover a more authentic, and therefore healthier personality. As an example of this, you can see in the picture below a middle-aged man who's dressed like a young boy. He's eating some ice cream and he's at an amusement park for kids. And the reason why is because part of his problem is that he was robbed of his identity when he was younger. And so the first part of the Psychomagic Act was to allow him to be the child he wasn't allowed to be. The third point is, this must be understood, the more difficult it is to fulfill an act, the more benefits will be obtained from it. To heal or to solve a problem, we need an iron will. The tireless battle to fulfill a goal that seems impossible develops our vital energy. I would really recommend a short by Teal Swans here because she nails this point better than the book does. The point of both the short and the book is that there is a resistance that is part of the process of healing. There's a fear that one experiences as we try to outgrow our previous identity. And I can validate that this is unavoidable. So the best thing you can do is learn to be familiar with this resistance and how it appears and how it feels, so that when you have a necessary act to do, you won't retreat. If you cave into that fear, instead of following the little voice behind it that wants to do it, but it feels it's not allowed to, or it's a shame, or it feels guilty to do it, if you cave into the fear, you will remain unchanged, and so necessarily the problem will remain too. As far as I'm concerned, I've learned to track this feeling of resistance, and I try to go at it as soon as it appears. And it's not because I'm more courageous, it's because I'm afraid that more things will pile on and make the task even more difficult. And so I better do it quickly than wait for it to become less manageable. The fourth and final step is always end an act in a positive way. Adding bad to bad changes nothing. Jodorowsky describes, I have recommended many times to consultants to bury objects, such as clothes or photograph, to free themselves from past sufferings. But I have always also asked that the consultant plant a tree or floral plant in the place where she buried the impure things. If I recommend to a consultant to let out the rage against someone accumulated over many years by tearing up a photograph or kicking a tomb or writing a letter of confrontation, I recommend that he smears the photograph with rose jam, write a love letter on the tomb with honey, or send the person with whom a reparation is needed a bouquet of flowers, a box of candies, or a bottle of liquor. The psychomagic act must be transformative, the suffering giving rise to a friendly end. Hate is love that has failed to be returned. There's a very poignant example of this principle in the movie, where a man who has suffered serious abuse from his father goes through a whole death and rebirth psychomagic act, and at the end Jodorowsky provides him with a photo of his father attached to a red balloon, and it's up to that man to release the picture of his father into the air. As I am revisiting the script for this video, I realized that the pumpkin psychomagic act might not have been the best choice to exemplify the fullness of psychomagic. And the reason why is I cannot really see the friendly end in this act. It might be something in the subtlety of the act, or it might be something that has been said off camera, something that Jodorowsky has advised. In any case, if you look at that act as a template and you want to follow something like that, I would strongly suggest that as the pumpkin pieces are being repackaged, that one should add something sweet or nice like honey, perfume, some chocolates, or maybe flower petals. Anything that would help to symbolize this friendly end we are looking for. And for the last step, now that we have the confession and an act, we have to take a leap of faith. And if you do so, you will be supported. I have found that when a consultant begins a psychomagic act, a mysterious relationship is produced between the individual intention and the exterior world. What seems impossible to find, a neighbor offers to the consultant. A professor, complaining of an imbalance, asked me for a psychomagic act. I recommended that he study with the circus artist to learn to balance himself on a wire cable. He said this was not possible because his school and his home were in a small village in the south of France where it would not be possible to find a circus artist. I asked him to stop thinking of the act as something impossible and that he trustingly let reality come to his aid. Some days later, he discovered that the father of one of his students was a circus artist, a retired tightrope walker. The consultant found his teacher a couple of miles away. And I can vouch for this. In my experience, this is true. Things that defy imagination will happen if you take the leap of faith. This might be why I've shied away from this topic until this 9th video, because life can turn upside down quite quickly if you decide to respond to the unconscious with symbolic actions. So if you are going to take that route, make sure to do it responsibly by following the guidelines that are outlined in this video. I hope this video clarifies what is meant by symbolic actions, and maybe it inspires some people who feel called to make their own psychomagic act. Psychomagic really works, and maybe it works a bit too much. You'll find some references and links in the description box, so you can study this material at your own pace. In the meantime, thank you for your attention and take care.